The judge smirked as a homeless veteran shuffled into the courtroom, ragged, silent, invisible. But when he opened the man's file, his face drained of color. Whispers erupted, a courtroom rose to its feet, and a nation would soon tremble with outrage. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The stale air of the courtroom pressed down like an invisible hand, suffocating and indifferent. Dust floated in thin shafts of light cutting through the cracked blinds, illuminating the tired faces of clerks and the sharpened expressions of onlookers, eager for their daily dose of superiority. Every cough, every shuffling footstep echoed too loudly, filling the hollow space where justice was supposed to live. Through the heavy wooden doors came Daniel Walker, shoulders slumped, steps dragging, as if each footfall demanded more strength than he had to spare. His army jacket, threadbare and faded, clung to his gaunt frame like a tattered flag too battered by wars both foreign and domestic. The gray hoodie beneath it was stained with the grime of too many nights slept under bridges and behind dumpsters. His jeans sagged around his knees, torn not with the careless pride of youth, but by the ruthless fingers of time and neglect. As he crossed the aisle toward the defendant's table, the whispers began. "Just another bum," hissed a woman near the back. "Bet he's here for drugs," muttered a man to his companion. The prosecutor, Ms. Valerie Harding, leafed through her notes with mechanical disinterest, her lips curling slightly in a practiced expression of disdain reserved for repeat offenders. She wore a crisp navy suit, every button and crease screaming order, discipline, superiority, the opposite of everything Daniel had become. At the head of it all sat Judge Alan Rutherford, the architect of the disdain radiating from every corner. His reputation was built on swift judgments and scathing lectures. To him, leniency was weakness, and mercy a fool's game. As Daniel was ushered forward by the bailiff, Rutherford pushed back in his leather chair, crossing his arms with theatrical laziness. A smirk, slow, deliberate, dripping with contempt, pulled at the corners of his mouth. He didn't see a veteran. He didn't see a man. He saw a burden, another ragged ghost haunting a system too bloated to care anymore. Rutherford's eyes flicked over Daniel like he was an inconvenient mess left too long in the sun. The gallery responded in kind, a low ripple of derisive chuckles, quick glances shared over crossed arms and self-satisfied grins. Daniel said nothing. His body, thin and trembling with exhaustion, remained still. Only his eyes, hollow yet stubbornly alive, betrayed any reaction. A flicker of hurt, quickly swallowed by resignation. He kept his head bowed, not in guilt, but in silent defiance, as if daring them to look closer. But no one did. Not yet. The clerk's voice rang out, clinical and cold, slicing through the thick tension like a scalpel. Case number 1.75B, Daniel Walker. Charges: trespassing on private property and theft of property valued under $50. The words hung in the air, sterile and detached, betraying none of the desperation or decay that had driven Daniel behind that hardware store, beneath that torn blue tarp, beside that battered, broken heater. In the clerk's recital, there was no mention of the rain that had lashed the streets that night, or of the brutal winds that had threatened to strip the last shred of warmth from a man already abandoned by fortune. Only facts, stripped of all humanity. Prosecutor Valerie Harding rose smoothly, heels clicking like gunshots on the polished floor. Her expression was a precise mixture of pity and revulsion, an actress long accustomed to playing to a courtroom audience. She tucked a strand of honey-blonde hair behind her ear and spoke with the calm cruelty of someone dissecting a specimen. "Your Honor, what we have here is not a matter of necessity, but a pattern," she began, her voice sharpened for maximum penetration. "Mr. Walker has repeatedly chosen to flout the basic expectations of civilized society. He could seek shelter through the appropriate channels. He could work. Instead, he steals, he trespasses, he pollutes our community with his refusal to take responsibility for himself. Daniel flinched almost imperceptibly, the words hitting him with the force of a physical blow. He kept his head down, but the reddening of his cheeks betrayed the shame clawing at him, shame he had long tried to bury under layers of indifference for his own survival. Harding pressed on, sensing blood in the water. This isn't about a heater, broken or otherwise. It's about the character of a man who believes rules do not apply to him. We must ask ourselves, Your Honor, how many chances does society owe a man who refuses to better himself? Judge Rutherford gave a short, humorless chuckle, low enough that only the first few rows caught it, but loud enough to spark a ripple of amusement across the gallery. Several people smirked openly now, emboldened by the example from the bench. Daniel stood alone, utterly, miserably alone, as the courtroom coiled tighter around him, ready to deliver its verdict not just on his actions, but on his worth as a human being. No public defender rose to protest the painting of him as a parasite. No friend, no family member called out from the pews to plead for context, for compassion, for truth. The air thickened with hostility, with judgment sharpened to a point. Daniel Walker, soldier, survivor, discarded citizen, faced them all with nothing but the thin fabric of a stolen tarp between him and their scorn. Judge Rutherford's fingers flicked lazily across the first page of the file, his mouth already curling into another smirk. But it froze there, mid-gesture. His brow furrowed. He leaned forward slightly, reading a line again, as if he must have misread it. Then another line, and another. His posture straightened. The easy arrogance drained from his face like water from a cracked jar. He flipped another page, faster now, the slap of paper against wood unnaturally loud in the courtroom's sudden suffocating quiet. A nervous cough echoed from somewhere in the back, but no one dared fill the silence with words. Even the bailiff, who moments ago had been smirking at the defendant's shabby clothes, shifted uncomfortably, sensing the sudden change in temperature. Rutherford's lips moved soundlessly as he scanned the citations listed one after another. Silver Star for gallantry in action under enemy fire. Bronze Star for meritorious service in a combat zone. Purple Heart, twice awarded for wounds received in battle. Each line hit harder than the last. 7 deployments: Iraq, Afghanistan, unnamed operations sealed under classified orders. Then the notes on captivity. 2 months in a hostile prison camp overseas. No rations, no medical care, torture. And yet, Daniel Walker, the man standing silently before them now, dressed in rags, had led a desperate, suicidal escape, carrying 2 wounded comrades through miles of enemy territory to reach an extraction point. His actions had saved lives. His courage had been commended personally by a general whose name commanded headlines. The judge's hands, once dismissive and sure, now gripped the bench with white-knuckled tension. He cleared his throat, but the sound was raw, almost a croak, as if words could not bridge the chasm that had opened between who Daniel Walker had been and who they had assumed he was. Around the room, heads turned, faces stiffening in dawning horror. The energy shifted, ugly and electric. The gallery that had moments ago relished in easy cruelty now found itself frozen, their collective conscience ambushed by a truth too brutal to ignore. Daniel stood motionless, a living monument to sacrifices none of them had ever been asked to make. His silence now carried a different weight. Not shame, not guilt, but a battered dignity that rebuked every smirk, every whisper, every condemning glance cast his way. No one laughed. No one moved. The courtroom's laughter, so smug, so certain, had been smothered into absolute agonizing silence. The walls themselves seemed to hold their breath, as if reluctant to witness what was about to unfold. Judge Rutherford's throat bobbed once. Then again, a desperate attempt to swallow back the shame clawing its way upward. But the dam had already broken. The silence fractured, first into whispers, then into voices, raw and electric with memory. A chair scraped violently against the floorboards as a man in the back row surged to his feet, eyes wide, voice cracking with emotion. "I know him!" he shouted, loud enough to rattle the light fixtures. His voice, so full of disbelief and reverence, cut through the room like a knife. "He carried my brother out of Fallujah. Everyone else had pulled back, but he went back for him." A ripple ran through the gallery, like a wave chasing itself ashore. Another figure, a middle-aged woman with trembling hands, rose next, her face streaked with tears. "He saved my cousin's unit during the Kandahar bombing," she said, almost gasping for air between words. "We thought they were all lost, but he brought them home." It was as if a match had been thrown onto dry tinder. People all around the room stood, hands to mouths, eyes wide with sudden searing recognition. Veterans in worn leather jackets, wives and mothers who had buried medals along with memories, all rising now one by one as realization crashed down on them with brutal, undeniable force. The young bailiff, who had barely hidden his earlier disdain, found himself moving instinctively. His heels clicked together with the sharp discipline of military training ingrained too deep to resist. His right hand snapped up into a salute so crisp it echoed louder than any words could have. Others followed, a quiet, reverent domino effect. Some clutched their hearts. Others, faces full of a complex tangle of sorrow and pride, saluted a man who had once fought under the same flag they cherished. And Daniel, battered, forgotten Daniel, stood in the eye of it all, unmoving, as the tide of recognition crashed around him. His wide, disbelieving eyes scanned the sea of faces, his breath hitching in his chest. There were no words for this. Only the stark, overwhelming collision of past and present, of sacrifice made and honor long denied. At the bench, Judge Rutherford sat ashen, visibly shrinking in his seat. His robe, once a symbol of absolute authority, now seemed an ill-fitting costume draped over a man exposed in all his weakness. He fumbled for words, the courtroom watching, demanding, silently accusing. "This court," Rutherford rasped, voice dry as parchment. He cleared his throat, but it only made the tremor in his tone more obvious. "Apologizes for its conduct today," he said, barely louder than a whisper. But no apology could stitch the torn fabric of that moment back together. The damage was done, and the courtroom, once a chamber of judgment, now stood transformed, a sacred hall of reckoning. The weight of the room bore down on Prosecutor Harding as she rose, her earlier confidence crumbling like brittle parchment. She smoothed the front of her blazer with trembling fingers, the gesture hollow, mechanical. Clearing her throat, she spoke quickly, her voice artificially steady. "Your Honor," she began, avoiding Daniel's gaze entirely. "In light of new information, the state moves to dismiss all charges against Mr. Walker with prejudice." Judge Rutherford, who mere minutes before had treated the proceedings as a tedious inconvenience, now sat rigid and colorless. He nodded stiffly, unable, or unwilling, to meet anyone's eyes. His hands, which had so casually flipped through Daniel's file, now struggled to control the pen trembling between his fingers. Each stroke of his signature seemed to drag across the paper like a confession of guilt written in slow, shaking lines. The clerk accepted the signed dismissal in silence, her face tight with unease. No applause followed. No cheers. The gravity of the moment demanded something deeper, the kind of silence reserved for funeral processions and battlefields. but the reckoning was only beginning. Unseen by the main players in the courtroom, cell phones were already alive in trembling hands. Tweets, texts, and videos shot in secret had begun to surge across social media within minutes. A reporter from the local paper, having recognized Daniel's name and decorations when murmurs began, had already slipped into the hallway, tapping furiously on a tablet. By evening, Daniel Walker's story had detonated across the nation like a shell in a quiet square. Decorated war hero humiliated by court. Public outrage erupts, screamed the headlines. Judge Smirks said homeless veteran and pays the price, declared another. Talk shows, veteran networks, and national news anchors latched onto the narrative with a ferocity reserved for true injustices that cut straight to the heart of the American identity. The mayor, sensing the political wildfire brewing, wasted no time. Standing stiffly at a press podium, framed by solemn-faced aides, he offered a formal and deeply public apology to Daniel, emphasizing the city's unwavering respect for our veterans. Behind the polished words lay a frantic scramble to contain the damage. Within 48 hours, a local veterans organization, galvanized by the public's fury, had not only secured Daniel a furnished apartment near the heart of town, but announced a full scholarship, tuition, books, and living expenses, should he choose to return to school. And Judge Alan Rutherford? The man who had once reigned over his courtroom with smug authority now found himself facing the cold steel of an ethics probe. Weeks later, tucked away in the 5th paragraph of a quietly released article, came the final note. His resignation, effective immediately, citing personal reasons. Daniel Walker never set foot in that courtroom again. He didn't need to. He had already reclaimed something far greater than a dismissed charge. He had reclaimed his honor and forced the world to see what it should have recognized all along.